Hi, my name is Sandra Ro, and I'm currently the CEO of the Global Business Blockchain Business Council, GBBC for short. So my previous position was at CME Group as the head of digitization, and we worked on launching Bitcoin futures, which obviously launched in December of last year. That was a project that took about two and a half years of painstakingly and sometimes painful education, awareness around what Bitcoin was and the potential of this being a new asset class as a digital asset class. When I think about other cryptocurrencies and whether they're interesting or not or relevant for futures, obviously I'm no longer at CME Group, so I can't opine on what they'll be launching next, but you just look at the market cap of what's out there. You know, Ethereum would be something that would be a good second candidate. And the third market cap, I think, largest market cap would be probably XRP or Bitcoin Cash. I'd have to double check. But you know, the ones that are most liquid is actually a pretty good criteria for looking at what's probably a good candidate. When people ask me what is GBBC and what does it do, I phrase it in the sense that it's a Swiss-based nonprofit really focusing on three things: blockchain education, blockchain advocacy, and blockchain partnerships. And who do we focus on? We look at working with governments, regulators, and C-suite executives of very large enterprises across industries, as well as linking them with startups and blockchain entrepreneurs. So when I think about which regions are most interesting right now, I wish I could pick one region. It's kind of exploding everywhere, and that's why it's keeping our very small team very busy. But when I think about what's really interesting from a use case standpoint, seeing that you've got small islands in the Caribbean, and you've got islands in the South Pacific, you've got small countries in Africa now getting into blockchain. I think we really need to spend the time with those government entities, the regulators, the entrepreneurs, to actually help them foster potential tech hubs there. I think that's really the true potential of what this could be, which is empowering small countries and small islands to create tech hubs of their own. There are certain problems, fundamentally, human rights violations. At the end of the day, you can try to shed a light or shine some light with technology, but human rights problems are human rights problems. That requires laws and government to actually come in and intervene. Tech can't solve everything, but I think with regards to documentation and payments and recognition of someone's identity, we could actually help with that. In places where there's no infrastructure and no documentation, it's literally starting with helping people be recognized. It's identity that people talk about, right? It's real. Most people don't have government-issued ID. It's getting paid. It's being able to leverage and have something recognized that you own, whether it's a goat or a car or a house or land. These are very basic things that many people in the world don't have. It's beyond a bank account. I know that people talk about unbanked people a lot, and that is important, but I actually would argue, do we need bank accounts even? Why don't we let people leapfrog into having mobile wallets that have digital currencies and fiat? We can help them actually do what happened with landlines, skip it all together and go straight to mobile. So when you ask me, so when I think about regions that are really interesting, I think about in the US, let's take us back to the US, LA versus Boston versus New York versus San Francisco or Omaha, they each have their own flavor. So in Omaha, for example, they're focusing on agriculture and insurance and supply chain, which makes sense because they've got a lot of companies that do that sort of thing in that region. And when I think of LA, what's going on there, I'm seeing blockchain meets virtual reality meets gaming in the entertainment space, and that's really cool and very specific to LA. I would close the gap on perception versus reality. I think we still have a very big gap in marketing and misperceptions of what blockchain is, what it does, what cryptocurrencies are, what the potential of this technology is. In some cases, too much hype. In other cases, it's actually a lot of skepticism because they haven't actually delved into what the potential of the tech is. You know, when I think about media, like traditional media outlets, I have a great deal of sympathy for the journalists. They're trying to get up to speed on a relatively technical area with a lot of jargon and new vocabulary that's often very confusing and contradictory at times. And frankly, this is a bit of an oddball community as well, and it's not easy to keep track of who's doing what's going on. It's very fast-paced. So I get where there's been some criticism mounted at traditional media for not capturing all the details, but I also have to say they have a pretty tough job. So right now, when if someone asks me what tech or what are you looking at that's really interesting, I think actually interoperability of blockchains is going to be a key feature. So I've been spending time looking at Cosmos. I've been looking at spending time looking at Polkadot, which is the parity technology solution, and really seeing whether we will have blockchains that can talk to each other. Because whether we like it or not, we have many blockchains, and we're going to probably exist in a multi-blockchain world for a while. I was at Ethereal last year for their inaugural summit, and it was smaller and it was a much more intimate affair, but the spirit is still there. I love the energy. It's bigger this year because obviously the interest has grown, but the spirit and the community, in many ways, the culture hasn't changed. And that's what I love about it. If I take my GBBC hat off for 1 minute, I've got a couple startups that we're launching, and I'm focusing on blockchain for social good projects. And in my mind, if we fulfill even half the ambitions that we think we want to fulfill, if we can help solve some real world problems using the tech, where the tech is needed, I think that's where we're going to have probably the most success, or at least what I would define as success.
Please welcome Sandra Ro, CEO of the Global Blockchain Business Council.
Hello everyone, and my apologies first of all. I am actually late, as if you looked at the agenda you would know this, but I have a good excuse. I've taken about 5 planes to get here from Rwanda, so I hope you will forgive me. So I'm very excited to be here. So I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about something that I find near and dear to my heart. It includes what GBBC is and what GBBC does, but actually I want to talk about some very specific use cases around small things, or particularly small countries, and what's happening in these places where blockchain can really impact in a meaningful way, where small can be powerful and small can be empowered. And so let's talk a little bit about that. First of all, what is GBBC? So I wear a couple hats in the community, and I'm very honored to do that. One of which is recently I've been appointed as the CEO of the Global Blockchain Business Council. And in a nutshell, it is a Swiss nonprofit focusing on education, advocacy, partnerships, building bridges across government, regulators, big enterprises, and small enterprises. So we're in about 35 countries. We were born at Davos in 2017. We're growing so fast, it's really hard for the team here. And Marcina is here in the audience somewhere, and the rest are scattered around the world. We're doing the best that we can to cover the ground that we need to, but the inbound that is coming from so many different countries and from so many different corners, it's hard for us to keep up. But that's what makes it exciting and challenging at the same time. So, as the Swiss nonprofit, our primary focus at the moment is really helping those who are out there who are not necessarily doing what you do every day, which is living and breathing and basically drinking, eating blockchain. These are people who are hearing about it, they're hearing kind of misconceptions, they're hearing maybe not whole truths sometimes, and they don't know where to go. That's one of the biggest issues, guys. I mean, some of you may have run across this. People don't necessarily know where to go. And it might be obvious to you, but it's still a challenge. And so this is one of the gaps that we'd like to fill. We're also working with a number of other blockchain startups and partnership-related nonprofits focusing on the education piece. But let's get the show on the road and talk a little bit about what I mean by small doesn't mean powerless, blockchain and a potential new world paradigm. So I'm going to talk about this one that has been brought to my attention very recently, but it's been going on for a while. So how many of you guys know about Barbuda and what happened in the hurricane last year? 1,800 residents, roughly, got evacuated. That island was totaled. How many of you actually also know that Barbuda was not only evacuated, but only about 400 to 500 people have returned? Why? Because there's basically little or no infrastructure there left. People are literally still picking up the pieces from what happened in the hurricane. Here's the other problem. There are now debates going on, and lawsuits, by the way, regarding the land. So I want you to think about this. They are the only island in the Caribbean that has common land. Did you know that? I didn't know that. And it's actually Antigua and Barbuda as a government. So the Prime Minister of Antigua is actually Antigua and Barbuda. They're making the argument that they need to sell the land. And Robert De Niro's real estate group is one of those groups saying they want to purchase the land. Decision. Do the citizens actually want to sell the land, or will this be forced upon them? An amendment was already passed into law that would allow the government to do this. But here's the thing. The people were never properly asked, what do you want to do about the land? Do you think that's fair? So there's a group of people, by the way, there's a diaspora in New York that met last month, and they're mounting a campaign. And this campaign, hopefully you'll hear more about, because it's been in the news, and if you guys want to follow the New York Times video on this, it's very informative. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to learn more about it. I'm not trying to say here what's right or wrong for Barbuda. They need to decide whether they're going to change the laws and get behind selling their land, or whether they want to keep their common land status and continue to do leasehold as they've been doing. How could blockchain help here? Because here's the thing, the message that the politicians are giving on one side is you have to do this. You have to do this because there's no other way for us to pay back loans we're going to have to raise to actually raise the infrastructure or build the infrastructure in Barbuda. And they've put that at roughly $250 million or so. But there's no clarity on where those figures are coming from. So again, another group of politicians and people in the blockchain space, people in the crypto space who feel passionately about this are going to help Barbuda with potentially launching an initiative where they first deal with the fact there are lawsuits going on at the moment to challenge the sale of the land. But then secondly, this, Barbuda, could be the first instance of a governance use case, whereby what if you could get all the people to agree to go onto a blockchain solution and agree a governance mechanism. So all of you out there working on governance solutions, if you can pitch in, get involved. I'll get you connected, okay? So there's one for you there. Mauritius. So for full disclosure, another hat I wear is I am an entrepreneur, and I'm the COO of UN, which stands for Unleashing Wealth in Nations. And one of the use cases that we're working on is around how do you document indigenous plants and seeds? Why would you want to do that? Well, here's the thing. If a sovereign nation has indigenous plants or seeds, shouldn't they and their citizens in some way benefit from any blockbuster drug or wellness product or cosmetic product that may be made? You may not agree. You may actually say, you know what, actually, the pharmaceutical company or the cosmetics company should take all the profits and they should benefit. But what if you didn't think that was fair? What if you did think that perhaps if there was a blockchain solution that could allow for a more transparent licensing mechanism for the licensing and the documenting of these plants could happen? So under a UN World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO legal framework, that will start in Mauritius. That we've identified about 10 to 20 commercially viable plants. There's many more, by the way, that they've got that are indigenous, but we've got about 10 to 20 that are commercially viable. Some that may actually even help further cancer research. Wouldn't that be great? So here's the thing. We'll start here. We have a list of other countries that are looking to document their plants as well. And the first instance is just registry and recognition of what these are and attached to which nations and which farmers. But how about the next level? Attaching it to scientists and academics and universities that are doing research in connection with these plants. And over time, smart contracts that would allow you to automate these processes whereby if somebody did want to use a plant, they could buy it fairly and transparently with a mechanism that would be available that's actually a global standard. That's the goal. It's a challenge and it's a big one, but we're going to start with Mauritius. So I'm going to talk about some more islands. You're going to think I'm island obsessed, but these just happen to be coming from islands. Vanuatu, Fiji, and we've got St. Lucia. Those are the flags that are up there. And in each of those instances, there's some very unique things going on. So, Vanuatu, we've been approached about disaster preparedness and disaster responsiveness. We're going to have more natural disasters, whether they sit in the Caribbean or the United States or Vanuatu. They're happening, and at least in my opinion, they're going to get worse and more extreme. So how could blockchain help with some of that? Not all of it, but some of it. There are obvious use cases like supply chain management. There's other use cases around distribution of funds and tracking that and making sure it doesn't leak or disappear as panic sets in when people are trying to just deal with the disaster. How can you prepare for this stuff better knowing more is coming? So that's one that Vanuatu is particularly interested in. And by the way, it doesn't apply just to Vanuatu. If you find a framework that works, you can apply that pretty much across anywhere, right? Tracking fish supply. You guys may have heard of this who work at Consensus, because this is actually a Consensus-related project. But traceable solutions in Fiji is tracking tuna. Why? Well, apparently there is labor slavery going on in the tuna markets. I didn't know that. And that's actually really sad. I eat tuna all the time. And it never occurred to me that there actually may be some really dodgy things going on in the tuna trade. So I'm really glad there's a company who's starting to shed some light in that particular market. And if you don't think it applies to you, I actually would say all the fish that we intake, all the plastic that they worry about sitting in the Pacific Ocean, that has an impact to our plates sitting in New York City. And I think as we are clearly a global community, it's important that we don't forget about the faraway projects as we also care about the projects that are right next door. And then finally, I'm going to leave you with an example of what we do at the GBBC, which is St. Lucia. We just had 2 days of intense education sessions with the Prime Minister and his cabinet. There were a number of partners there with us. It wasn't just GBBC. We believe in collaboration. There were a number of other institutions there. And we sat in a room with these politicians. And Mersina, if she's around, she was the one who was representing us from GBBC. And we walked through the basics and answered all the questions that came up about Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain and DLT, you name it. For some of you, you've been in the space for so long, it's probably very tedious and nauseating to hear that, but we still have to do it. And luckily, we're willing to step in to do that with governments. And you know what? They found it very helpful. And there will be next steps beyond that. So look out for what St. Lucia's doing. because now they're very motivated to make things happen from a policy standpoint, and that includes potentially changing laws. That's pretty exciting. So look, I wasn't going to spend too much time up here other than to give you some examples of what I see going on in the world. And this is why I think this should be a world paradigm shift. Because here's the thing. This conversation about this tech shouldn't just be about the USA and China and Russia. Because if it ends up being that conversation, I'm going to be disappointed. I hope all of you are going to be a bit disappointed. Just as much as this tech is meant to be decentralized and distributed, we need to give opportunity and empowerment to countries as small as some of these islands are. And here's the great thing. I'm going to give you a little anecdote about my recent trip to Rwanda. Rwanda just had Transform Africa Summit. And within that summit, which is, by the way, their 4th year running, the first inaugural blockchain hub. And there were a number of panels ongoing. And they talked about a whole diversified number of things. Do you know how many young people showed up? I couldn't believe the hundreds of young faces I saw who just wanted to just take it in. Their first question is, where do I go learn more about this? Are there classes? The energy and the motivation's there. And they didn't just come from Rwanda. They came from Benin, Tunisia, Algeria, all the neighboring countries around Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya. It's happening, guys. It's happening everywhere. I just wish I could kind of like duplicate myself and, be everywhere, but I can't. But with all of us in the room, we sure can make an impact. So I'll take a couple questions. I just wanted to really kind of leave you with that message that I think we have an opportunity here to help really the small guys have a fighting chance to actually take back some power, have a voice, and actually create better lives for their citizens. It can't solve every problem, but there are some that tech can solve. So thank you. And if there happen to be any questions, great. Otherwise, I'm going to stick around for a few hours, so I'll be happy to talk to you guys bilaterally as well. Any questions?
Hi, Sandra. It's John with Blockchain Beach. Since you brought up several islands there, I had a question for you about another island, Puerto Rico. What are your thoughts on the current, the way that the blockchain community is embracing Puerto Rico, and are there any parallels that you can draw between the efforts in Puerto Rico and some of the islands that you mentioned?
So I'll be very frank with you. I'm not as close to what's going on in Puerto Rico. I do know of some energy projects that are going on there. I don't know how many of you are aware of what's going on in Puerto Rico from a northern Puerto Rico standpoint. They've had some massive incident where the energy is just, electricity is just out. How do you get energy up as soon as possible? And they've got like almost immediate disaster needs as well as more long-term infrastructure needs. And so I know that MIT is there. I know there are lots of other really great entrepreneurs who are trying to help. But I'll be very honest with you, I don't know, I'm not as close to Puerto Rico. But here's the thing. Again, why did all of that happen? It's a post-disaster issue. And what Vanuatu wants to come up with as framework could apply for Puerto Rico, could apply for any place that has disasters. So what I think we need to do is get really good at connecting the dots. Because here's the other thing I'm noticing, is there are a lot of projects going on. There are a lot of pilots going on all over the world. I did a pit stop in Croatia and saw some of the cool stuff that's happening there. But here's the thing, everyone's kind of still sitting in their local circles. Doing their thing. And the interconnectedness that we need is really about the dialogue. I don't have a silver bullet solution for that, other than, we are doing a lot of communication on the 1,500 messaging apps that are out there. But I think we've got to figure out smart ways to actually help each other and collaborate. Thanks.
Good afternoon.
Oh, hi.
Sandra. Puerto Rico, very simple. Governor Rosselló is betting his future and the country's, or Puerto Rico's future on blockchain. We've had 3 different blockchain events over there. My name is Evelio Medina, President and CEO of the Miami Brickell Chamber of Commerce. More than welcome to come to the Blockchain Americas Summit in November, Miami. You're all welcome. Question is very simple. You talked about the plant and the situation. How does that you're talking about the ownership of those plants are for not farmers, or is it a country? Who owns those plants?
So the registry of the plant is just to register that they originate from Puerto Rico, for example. And then the actual plants themselves would need to be demarcated by the farmer or the group of people that own that property.
Right, because we grow tobacco in Nicaragua, so I just wanted to see how you do that.
Yeah, and every country also has very specific ways they want to do it, so it'll be tailored to, there'll be a global legal framework, but it is tailored for the local government and farmers and academic needs.
Good, so we'll talk a little bit later and invite you to Miami.
Love to talk to you about that. Am I alternating? I think that's a fair thing to do. Over
Sure.
there.
First of all, thank you so much. You guys seem like you're doing incredible work. I'm Ronnie. I'm working with ETH News here. And I've heard from many people differing opinions. Some think that the US needs to set the standard on how blockchain can be applied and whatnot. You know, New York is the financial capital of the world, yet we're not the most friendly to blockchain ventures. And other people say the US doesn't really need crypto from a financial standpoint because we have a pretty strong economy and a pretty strong financial system, except for 2008. Do you guys focus on the US at all, or are you intentionally targeting other countries?
No, we do. We have an office in Washington, D.C., which I failed to mention. But here's the thing. Let me throw this back at the audience. How many people think the U.S. should dictate standards for blockchain or crypto?
No. I'm just saying that the US often leads the way.
Yeah. Okay. How many people think the U.S. will lead the way in blockchain and crypto standards? Not many takers. But you're right. Some policymakers think that the U.S. will lead. I think it's TBD. I think there are many countries who are already helping, who've already laid out frameworks. Malta, I didn't mention Malta. I didn't mention Estonia. I didn't mention Switzerland because I already know you guys know about all of them. I wanted to name a couple countries that might be a surprise to you. Iceland is another one. So there are countries out there doing amazing things, but I didn't choose those guys because they're pretty much headline news already. Thanks.
Good answer. Thank you for a great presentation. I'm Brennan O'Rear. Quick follow-up. You know, you're talking about supporting ecosystems that are innovating, right? And something that is always a challenge in technological innovation is thinking through consequences and trying to deter, obviate the most obvious negatives. How are you working with some of the businesses that you're interacting with to think through that? And what frameworks, if any, do you use? So,
first of all, I hope everyone heard the question around consequences, around trying to do good. And actually, I absolutely agree with you. Sometimes you can have the best intentions and have very bad outcomes that don't actually help people. And that really sucks if that happens. How do we avoid that? Well, I actually believe a world where we don't do things in a vacuum. We don't just have developers building tech that don't make sense, that don't solve real world problems. We don't necessarily have, and I mean when you apply it at a more practical level, not just doing it for fun. And then you work with government. Look, this is real world. I don't really like the thought of anarchy and that we change systems without government at least giving them a chance to come along. If they choose not to come along, that's their own issue. But I do think it actually takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to potentially transform and bring this tech into the real world.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank you very much for spending the time. And I love this community. I think we have the potential to do so much, so don't give up. Thanks.